Before the people of Whiting and Robertsdale had personal automobiles, before there were yellow cabs, before they had municipal bus service, Uber, or Lyft, they used streetcars to get to places too far away to walk. They could ride streetcars to and from Chicago's Loop, or hop a streetcar to downtown Hammond to shop. A streetcar could get them to East Chicago and back home again. Thousands of employees and their family members rode to Whiting Park, Kindle's Grove, and other picnic grounds on streetcars to attend annual events that Standard Oil, Amazo, and other big local companies sponsored. I'm Jerry Bannock with the Whiting-Robertsdale Historical Society, and this is the story of the Hammond, Whiting, and East Chicago Electric Railway. In the middle of the 19th century, horses powered America's earliest streetcars over steel rails embedded in the street. Smooth rails and wheels enabled horses to pull heavy loads on these horse railroads. Some early streetcar systems used steam engines to power the cars, but noisy engines with moving parts on open cars often spooked horses that shared the streets with them. One solution to this problem was the steam dummy, a steam motor car covered with a shell to hide the engine and reduce the noise. It was often designed and painted to look like a passenger car. All the way back in 1866, Hammond actually granted a franchise to a firm that called itself the Hammond Horse and Steam Dummy Railway Company, but no such railway was ever built. Systems in some cities, including Chicago, opted for cable cars that ran on rails with a slot between them. An underground cable continuously moved in that slot, pulled by huge winding wheels from a central powerhouse. Cars had grips, much like a pair of pliers, that grabbed the underground cable, pulling the cars forward. The streetcar system through Whiting and Robertsdale was a trolley car system. The term trolley car comes from the trolley poles that reached up from atop the cars to overhead wires, supplying electricity to the car's motors. In 1892, Hammond and East Chicago had each built small electric streetcar lines. In 1893, Hammond connected its line with East Chicago's. East Chicago extended a line to Whiting running up Indianapolis Boulevard to Schrag Avenue, then up to 119th Street, west on 119th to the Boulevard, and from there on up to 5 Points. Later that same year, these lines came together to form the Hammond, Whiting, and East Chicago Electric Railway Company, or HW&EC. In 1894, the HW&EC extended its line from 5 Points to the Illinois state line, and in 1895 it connected downtown Hammond to Robertsdale by way of a line that ran up Sheffield and Calumet Avenues to 5 Points. The loop through Hammond, Whiting, and East Chicago was now complete and connected to Chicago's streetcar system. It became known simply as the Green Line because all of its cars were painted green. For 15 cents, travelers from all three Indiana towns could ride to 63rd Street in Chicago, where they could then transfer to any point in Chicago's system, and cars owned by various Chicago companies were familiar sights operating on HW&EC tracks in Robertsdale and Whiting. In 1896, the HW&EC claimed ridership of 500,000 passengers a year, and the Chicago City Railway purchased a controlling interest in the company. Eventually, that line and others consolidated under the authority of the Chicago Surface Lines, which we know today as the Chicago Transit Authority. Also in 1896, the HW&EC built a car barn in North Hammond at the intersection of Sheffield Avenue and Goslin Street for maintaining rolling stock. In 1910, they added a 2-story office building, and in 1918 added a lot for storing their long double truck cars. These buildings stood until 2021, when they were demolished to make way for the South Shore Railroad to expand. In 1929, the HW&EC purchased property at Sheffield and 137th Street. That site was used for material storage and later to demolish obsolete streetcars. Today, that's the eastern portion of the Sheffield Estates trailer park. In the early days, a streetcar ride up Sheffield Avenue to Chicago was a scenic trip. traveling between Wolf Lake and George Lake, whose shorelines back then stretched considerably farther than they do today. Riders passed by popular picnic resorts like Gruner's Grove and Kendall's Resort, and passed by block-long ice houses on their way to Robertsdale. At 5 points, they passed the White House Resort, formerly the Forsyth family mansion, and on beyond the racetracks of the Roby Racing Association. Traveling by streetcar, however, was often no luxury cruise. On the HW and EC system, streetcars often left a lot to be desired. On open summer cars, if a rainstorm came up, the motorman and conductor had to stop the car and quickly put side curtains in place to keep the passengers from getting even wetter than they probably already were. In 1908, the Lake County Times reported, quote, "It is an actual fact that Hammond women have been made sick by a ride on one of the local streetcars, and every day people in poor health, old men and children, are compelled to ride over rails that are a disgrace to any self-respecting company." Yet, the HW and EC was the popular way for our citizens to travel in and out of Chicago. These scenes from the Chicago surface lines show the chaos that streetcar riders faced on busy city streets. But the dangers weren't limited to Chicago only. On our side of the state line, according to newspaper reports in 1895, a rider sued the HW and EC for $5,000, alleging injuries incurred in a streetcar wreck near Whiting. That same year, at the corner of 119th and Ohio Avenue, a power pole broke off, letting the trolley wire fall down. It struck a pedestrian on the arm, giving him a severe electric shock and burning his coat. In 1896, a man was driving a horse and wagon on Indianapolis Boulevard near 106th Street when he was struck by a streetcar. It threw him to the ground, and before he could recover himself, he was struck by another streetcar on the same line. In 1897, a streetcar conductor had to evict an offensive drunk from his car. The drunk pulled a knife and made repeated stabs at him, cutting him in the thigh before being overpowered. In a 1906 report, the Lake County Times expressed an opinion held by many disgruntled riders over their treatment at the hands of rude or belligerent conductors. Quoting from the paper, "A bricklayer named Fred Neff had beaten up conductor Young, making Young over into something about as near a corpse as could be without killing him entirely. At Neff's trial, he was merely fined $10. The article said that it was a verdict that practically reads, 'Served him right.' There are too many of these cheap plugs who get their carcasses into uniforms and brass buttons and then vent their innate brutality on the weak and the helpless. Let them take a lesson." After the end of World War I, buses and autos without regular routes called jitneys emerged. As quickly as they appeared, many of them went out of business, but were just as quickly replaced by others. Then in 1924, regular scheduled bus service was begun here. The rapid growth of privately owned automobiles, the jitney service and bus service proved ruinous to the streetcar lines. By 1929, the HW and EC had been losing money for years. Their property, tracks, and cars were in terrible disrepair. The company went into receivership and was purchased by Calumet Railways Incorporated, which announced big, expensive plans for improvements and expansion. But the stock market crash of 1929 put a quick end to Calumet Railway's big plans, and the cities of Hammond, Whiting, and East Chicago were in danger of losing their electric railway service. In 1931, the line, with its battered and poorly maintained property, changed ownership again, but by then its fate was sealed. In 1934, service between Hammond and East Chicago was ended. As the Great Depression wore on, service was continuously reduced until in 1940, Whiting and Robertsdale saw their last streetcar roll through town.